The heavy steel door of the federal penitentiary in upstate New York groaned open, releasing Marcus Sullivan into a world that had moved on without him for 15 years. The September morning air hit his face like a cold slap of reality, carrying with it the scent of wet asphalt and diesel fumes from the prison transport buses. Marcus stood motionless for a moment, his weathered hands clutching a paper bag containing his few possessions, as if the weight of freedom itself was something he needed to learn to carry again. The guard behind him cleared his throat impatiently, a not-so-subtle reminder that even in freedom, Marcus was still being pushed forward by forces beyond his control. The New York skyline in the distance looked alien to him now, its towers reaching higher, its lights brighter, creating a constellation of progress he had not been part of. Marcus had entered prison in 2009 when smartphones were just beginning to reshape society, and now he emerged into a world where technology had fundamentally altered every aspect of human interaction. His sister Sarah waited by a rental car, her face a map of the years that had passed, etched with worry lines that hadn't been there when she'd last visited him 3 months ago. She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, the kind of smile reserved for terminal patients and broken things that might never be whole again. "Marcus," she said simply, and in that single word was contained all the sorrow, relief, and uncertainty of their situation. He nodded, unable to trust his voice just yet, and climbed into the passenger seat. The car still had that new smell, synthetic and clean, everything the prison hadn't been. As they drove away from the facility, Marcus watched the building shrink in the side mirror until it was just another grey structure against the morning sky. But he knew it would never truly disappear from his rear view. The drive to Manhattan took 2 hours, during which Sarah filled the silence with careful updates about family members, many of whom had stopped believing in his innocence years ago. Their mother had passed away 7 years into his sentence, still writing letters every week until the cancer took her ability to hold a pen. Their father, already struggling with dementia when Marcus was convicted, now lived in a care facility in Queens, his memories of having a son fading like old photographs left in the sun. Marcus absorbed this information without comment. Each revelation, another weight added to the crushing realization of all he had lost. They pulled up to a modest apartment building in Washington Heights, far from the Upper West Side brownstone, where Marcus had lived his previous life as an investigative journalist for the New York Tribune. Sarah had arranged this place, she explained, using what little remained of his savings after the legal fees had consumed almost everything. The apartment was on the 3rd floor, a studio with water-stained ceilings and windows that faced a brick wall, but it was his. At least for now. Sarah had stocked the refrigerator and left a prepaid cell phone on the counter, its simplicity almost mocking compared to the smartphone she constantly checked. "I have to get back to work," Sarah said after showing him around the sparse space. She was a nurse now at Presbyterian Hospital, working double shifts to make ends meet. "But I'll come by tomorrow, and we can talk about next steps." She paused at the door, seeming to wrestle with words she'd probably rehearsed. "Marcus, I know you're angry. You have every right to be, but please don't do anything reckless. You're free now. That's what matters." After she left, Marcus stood in the center of the empty apartment, feeling more imprisoned than he had in his cell. Freedom, he was learning, came with its own set of bars, invisible but no less restrictive. The world had labeled him a murderer, convicted of killing Jennifer Morrison, a source who had been feeding him information about corruption in the city's construction contracts. The prosecution had painted him as a journalist who had crossed ethical lines, who had become too involved with his source, and who had killed her when she threatened to expose their relationship. None of it was true, but truth had become a luxury he couldn't afford in a courtroom where the evidence, however manufactured, had been overwhelming. He walked to the window and looked out at the brick wall, remembering his view from his old apartment, how he could see Central Park from his home office where he'd written stories that had once mattered, that had once changed things. His editor at the Tribune, Richard Brennan, had been quick to distance himself and the paper from the scandal. The man who had once called Marcus the best investigative journalist of his generation had testified about Marcus's obsessive tendencies and boundary issues. The betrayal still burned like acid in his throat. The phone Sarah had left began to ring, its sharp electronic tone jarring in the quiet apartment. Marcus stared at it, uncertain whether answering would pull him further into this new reality or offer him a lifeline out of it. On the fourth ring, he picked up. The voice on the other end was young, female, and unfamiliar. "Mr. Sullivan, my name is Helena Martinez. I'm an attorney with the Innocence Project of New York. I've been reviewing your case for the past 2 years, and I believe we need to talk. I think I can prove you were framed." Marcus gripped the phone tighter, feeling something shift inside him, a sensation he barely recognized after years of dormancy. It might have been hope, or it might have been rage, but either way it was movement, and after 15 years of stasis, even dangerous movement felt like progress. He agreed to meet her the next day, ending the call without ceremony. Outside, the city hummed with its relentless energy, 8 million stories unfolding simultaneously, and Marcus Sullivan was about to write himself back into the narrative, whether New York was ready for him or not. The coffee shop on Amsterdam Avenue buzzed with the morning ritual of Columbia University students and Upper West Side professionals, their conversations creating a white noise that Marcus found oddly comforting. He had arrived 30 minutes early, partly from the prison habit of structured time and partly from a need to scope out the environment before committing to it. He chose a corner table with clear sightlines to both exits, another habit that would probably never leave him. The coffee tasted like liquid gold after 15 years of institutional sludge, though his stomach, still adjusting to freedom, protested against its richness. Helena Martinez entered exactly on time, her presence commanding attention despite her relatively small stature. She couldn't have been more than 32, Marcus calculated, which meant she would have been in high school when he was convicted. She wore a simple black suit that looked expensive despite its understated cut, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never been broken by the system she worked within. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional bun, but a few rebellious strands had escaped, softening her otherwise sharp appearance. She spotted him immediately, her brown eyes meeting his with an intensity that suggested she had done her homework. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, sitting down across from him without ceremony. She pulled a thick folder from her leather bag, its edges worn from handling. "Thank you for meeting me. I know this must be difficult, returning to the world after what you've been through." There was no pity in her voice, just acknowledgement, and Marcus appreciated that. Pity was another form of prison, one built from good intentions, but prison nonetheless. "You said you've been reviewing my case for 2 years, Marcus said, his voice still carrying the flat effect he'd developed inside. "Why?" The Innocence Project typically focuses on DNA evidence. There was no DNA in my case, just circumstantial evidence and witness testimony. He watched her face carefully, looking for the tells that would reveal her true motivation. Everyone wanted something. He'd learned that lesson long before prison, and Helena Martinez, despite her idealistic sheen, would be no different. Helena opened the folder, revealing photographs, documents, and handwritten notes that Marcus recognized from his trial. "You're right that we usually focus on DNA cases, but yours caught my attention for a different reason. 3 years ago, I was working on another case, a gang-related murder from 2008. During my investigation, I came across a name that also appeared in your file, Detective Thomas Kozlov. He was the lead investigator on your case, and his handling of evidence has come under scrutiny in several other convictions." Marcus felt his jaw tighten at the mention of Kozlov. The detective had been like a pit bull during the investigation, convinced of Marcus's guilt from day one. "Kozlov's retired now, living comfortably in Florida from what I hear. Even if he did plant evidence, proving it 15 years later would be nearly impossible." The cynicism in his voice was thick enough to cut, but Helena seemed unfazed by it. "That's where you're wrong," Helena said, pulling out a document Marcus didn't recognize. 6 months ago, Kozlov's former partner, Detective Ray Morrison, no relation to your victim, was arrested for evidence tampering in a separate case. As part of his plea deal, he's been providing information about other cases where evidence might have been manipulated. Your name came up, Mr. Sullivan. Morrison claims that Kozlov had a particular interest in your case, that there was pressure from above to make sure you were convicted. The coffee shop noise seemed to fade as Marcus processed this information. Pressure from above? From who? He leaned forward despite himself, feeling the investigative instincts that had once defined him stirring from their long dormancy. Helena pulled out another photograph, this one showing a man Marcus recognized immediately. City Councilman James Crawford, though he'd been a developer back in 2009, one of the major players in the construction industry that Marcus had been investigating. Crawford's company was awarded 3 major city contracts in the 6 months after your conviction, Helena explained. Contracts that Jennifer Morrison had documented evidence of bid rigging for, evidence that disappeared after her death and was never introduced at your trial. I've spent the last year tracking down former employees of Crawford's company. 3 of them are willing to testify that they saw Jennifer Morrison at the company offices the week before she died, and that Crawford personally escorted her out, seeming very agitated. Marcus stared at the photograph of Crawford, remembering the man's smooth denials when Marcus had tried to interview him years ago. Even if that's true, Crawford's practically untouchable now. He has connections throughout the city government, probably judges, prosecutors, police commissioners. Going after him would be like trying to take down a mountain with a spoon. The defeat in his voice surprised even him. Prison had taught him to abandon hope as a survival mechanism, but hearing it spoken aloud made him realize how much of himself he'd surrendered. Helena's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or determination. That's exactly the attitude that allows men like Crawford to operate with impunity. Yes, he's powerful, but he's also arrogant. He thinks he's gotten away with it, which means he's probably made mistakes, left trails. I've already found financial records showing payments from Crawford's company to a private security firm that employed 2 men who were later convicted of assault. One of those men, Anthony Russo, is currently serving time in Rikers and might be willing to talk in exchange for a reduced sentence. You're talking about opening a massive can of worms, Marcus said, his mind already racing through the implications. Crawford won't just roll over. He'll use every resource at his disposal to bury this, to bury us. You're young, idealistic. You don't understand what these people are capable of. He stopped himself, hearing his father in those words, the father who had told him not to pursue journalism, not to rock boats, not to make enemies. Helena closed the folder and looked at him directly. Mr. Sullivan, I may be young, but I'm not naive. My father was a whistleblower in a corporate fraud case 12 years ago. The company destroyed him, professionally and personally. He took his own life when I was 20, so believe me when I say I understand exactly what these people are capable of. But I also understand that the only thing that allows them to win is when good people decide the fight isn't worth it. The words hung between them like a challenge. Marcus saw something in her eyes then, a damage that matched his own, but hadn't yet calcified into cynicism. "Why are you really doing this?" he asked quietly. Helena was quiet for a moment, then spoke with careful precision. "Because the system failed you, just like it failed my father. But unlike him, you survived. You have a chance to fight back, to expose not just what happened to you, but the entire network of corruption that made it possible. I can't bring my father back, but maybe I can help you reclaim your life and, in doing so, prevent this from happening to others." Marcus looked out the window at the city moving past, all those lives intersecting and separating, unaware of the battles being fought in coffee shops and courtrooms. "If we do this," he said slowly, "we do it my way. I know these people, how they think, how they operate, and we're going to need more than just legal channels. We're going to need media pressure, public opinion, and probably a fair amount of luck. Helena smiled for the first time since sitting down, and it transformed her face from serious attorney to something more human. Then it's fortunate that you used to be one of the best investigative journalists in the city. I've read all your old articles, Mr. Sullivan. You had a gift for finding the truth and making people care about it. That gift didn't disappear just because you went to prison. As they began to discuss strategy, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years, the thrill of the hunt. It was dangerous, possibly futile, but it was also the first thing that had made him feel truly alive since the prison doors closed behind him. Helena Martinez might have been young, but she had given him something more valuable than legal representation. She had given him a reason to fight, and for a man who had lost everything, that was no small gift. The meeting with Anthony Russo at Rikers Island felt like a grotesque homecoming for Marcus. The familiar sounds of metal doors slamming, the institutional smell of disinfectant mixed with despair, and the watchful eyes of guards who recognized him despite his new status as visitor rather than inmate. Helena had arranged the meeting through Russo's public defender, promising to advocate for a sentence reduction if his information proved valuable. Marcus sat beside her in the attorney meeting room, fighting the muscle memory that told him he belonged on the other side of the table. Russo was a thick-necked man in his 40s, with the kind of scars that suggested a life lived violently. He studied Marcus with the calculating gaze of a predator, recognizing another predator, even one whose teeth had been filed down by the system. "I remember you," Russo said, his Brooklyn accent thick as motor oil. "You were in Block C for a while before they transferred you upstate. Kept to yourself, smart move." He turned to Helena with considerably less warmth. "So, what's this about? My lawyer said you might be able to help with my sentence." Helena placed a photograph of James Crawford on the table. "We need to know about your relationship with Crawford Construction, and specifically about any jobs you might have done for them in 2009. She kept her voice steady, professional, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. This was her first time in Rikers, and the place had a way of seeping into your bones within minutes. Russo laughed, a sound like grinding gears. "Lady, you think I'm stupid. Crawford's got reach everywhere. You want me to snitch on him? I might as well paint a target on my back. Besides, I don't know nothing about nothing." He started to stand, but Marcus spoke for the first time since they'd entered the room. "Jennifer Morrison," Marcus said quietly, 28 years old, graduated summa cum laude from Cornell. She had a 6-year-old daughter named Emma, who's now 21, growing up without a mother. You helped kill her, didn't you, Anthony?" The room went silent, except for the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. Russo slowly sat back down, his face cycling through emotions before settling on a mixture of anger and what might have been regret. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but the conviction had drained from his voice. "I know Crawford paid you and your partner, what was his name, Dmitry Volkov, $50,000 2 days after Jennifer Morrison was murdered." Marcus continued, pulling out bank records Helena had obtained through subpoena. "I know Volkov died in a car accident 3 years later, single vehicle, no witnesses. Convenient, and I know you're doing 15 years for aggravated assault, but the victim, surprisingly, refused to testify, almost like someone convinced him it wasn't in his best interest." Helena watched this exchange with growing alarm. They had agreed that she would lead the questioning, but Marcus had shifted into a mode she hadn't seen before. The investigative journalist who had once exposed a senator's bribery scandal emerging from beneath 15 years of institutional suppression. He was dangerous in a different way than Russo, dangerous because he understood how to use information like a weapon. Russo's jaw worked silently for a moment before he spoke. "Even if what you're saying was true, and I'm not saying it is, what's in it for me? You're talking about murder conspiracy. That's life without parole if it sticks. My 15 years looks pretty good compared to that." Helena leaned forward, reasserting her role. The district attorney's office is already building a case against Crawford for bid rigging and corruption. Your cooperation in the Morrison case could be part of a larger plea agreement. We're not looking to put you away for murder, Mr. Russo. We're looking for the truth about who ordered it and why. You were just the muscle. Crawford was the brain. And if you don't cooperate, Marcus added, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before prison, I'll make sure every media outlet in the city knows that Anthony Russo is sitting on information about the murder of a young mother, information he's keeping quiet to protect a rich developer who's probably forgotten he even exists. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Russo looked between them, calculating odds, weighing risks. Finally, he leaned back and crossed his arms. I want full immunity for anything I say about the Morrison situation, and I want it in writing before I tell you anything more than hypotheticals. Helena nodded, already pulling out her legal pad. I can work on that, but I need something to take to the DA first. Give us something we can verify, and I'll get the process started. Russo was quiet for a long moment, then spoke in a low voice. Hypothetically, if someone wanted to make a problem disappear in 2009, and that problem was a woman who had documents that could destroy several careers, that someone might reach out through intermediaries to people who specialize in making problems disappear. And hypothetically, those specialists might make it look like someone else did it, someone who was already sniffing around, asking questions, making themselves a convenient fall guy. Marcus felt his hands clench under the table. And hypothetically, how would these specialists frame this convenient fall guy? Plant evidence, maybe, Russo said, studying his fingernails. Create a false timeline. Make sure witnesses saw things that didn't happen or didn't see things that did. Detective on the case might be encouraged to focus on one suspect, ignore leads that pointed elsewhere. Hypothetically. Helena was writing furiously, but Marcus's mind was racing ahead. Who else was involved? Crawford couldn't have orchestrated all this alone. Russo's smile was sharp and unpleasant. Hypothetically, you'd be surprised how many people have a vested interest in keeping certain construction contracts flowing to certain companies. We're talking about hundreds of millions in city contracts. That kind of money buys a lot of loyalty and even more silence. The guard knocked on the door, signaling their time was up. As they prepared to leave, Russo grabbed Marcus's wrist with surprising speed. You were inside for 15 years, so let me give you some free advice. Crawford and his people, they don't just destroy lives, they erase them. You sure you want to dig up these bones? Sometimes the dead should stay buried. Marcus pulled his hand free, meeting Russo's gaze steadily. I'm already dead, Anthony. I died the day they convicted me for a crime I didn't commit. The only question now is whether I take the real killers down with me. Outside Rikers, the afternoon sun felt like an assault after the institutional fluorescence. Helena was quiet as they walked to her car, processing what they'd learned. Finally, as they drove back toward Manhattan, she spoke. You knew about Volkov's death. That wasn't in any of the files I showed you. Marcus stared out at the city passing by. I may have been in prison, but I still had ways of getting information. Other inmates, guards who owed me favors, newspapers, eventually internet access in the library. I've spent 15 years putting pieces together, but I could never do anything about it from inside. And now, Helena asked, navigating through traffic with the aggressive precision of a native New Yorker. Now we have Russo ready to talk, but we need more. Crawford's too smart to have left a clear trail. We need someone from inside his organization, someone who was there in 2009 and knows where the bodies are buried, metaphorically speaking. Helena pulled out her phone at a red light, scrolling through her contacts. I might have a lead. There's a woman named Patricia Chen who worked as Crawford's executive assistant from 2007 to 2010. She left abruptly, supposedly for a better opportunity, but there were rumors of a settlement, a non-disclosure agreement. She might be willing to talk if we can guarantee protection. Marcus felt the familiar sensation of a story coming together, pieces clicking into place like a complex puzzle revealing its picture. But he also felt something else, something Rousseau's warning had awakened. Fear. Not of death or pain, those were old companions, but fear that even if they exposed the truth, it wouldn't matter. The system that had failed him once could fail him again, and this time Helena would be caught in the wreckage too. As they drove back into Manhattan, the skyline rising before them like a promise or a threat, Marcus made a decision. They would pursue this to the end, wherever it led, but he would make sure Helena had exit strategies, ways to distance herself if things went bad. He had already lost 15 years. He wouldn't be responsible for her losing even one. The fight for truth was his, had always been his, and if necessary, he would finish it alone. The abandoned warehouse in Long Island City carried the kind of silence that made Marcus's skin crawl with memory. Patricia Chen had insisted on meeting here, away from any possible surveillance, any potential witnesses. She stood in a shaft of late afternoon sunlight streaming through a broken window, her designer coat incongruous against the industrial decay. At 45, she still carried herself with the precision of someone who had once managed the life of a powerful man, but her eyes held the haunted quality of someone who had seen too much. "I shouldn't be here," Patricia said, without preamble, as Marcus and Helena approached. "The NDA I signed doesn't just carry financial penalties. Crawford made it very clear what would happen if I ever talked." Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out a cigarette, a habit she'd clearly returned to under stress. Helena stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "Ms. Chen, we can protect you. With Anthony Rousseau's testimony and yours, we can build a case that will put Crawford away. He won't be able to hurt anyone once this comes to light." Patricia's laugh was bitter as cigarette smoke. "You don't understand the scale of what you're dealing with. Crawford isn't just one corrupt developer. He's part of a network that goes all the way to Albany, maybe higher. Jennifer Morrison stumbled onto something much bigger than bid rigging. She found evidence of money laundering, bribes to state officials, connections to organized crime. That's why she had to die." Marcus felt the floor shift beneath him, the implications cascading through his mind. "You knew Jennifer Morrison?" "I introduced her to Crawford," Patricia said, her voice heavy with guilt. "She came to the office asking questions about city contracts. I thought if I set up a meeting, played it safe, I could control the situation. I didn't know Crawford had already decided she was a threat. The meeting was just to figure out how much she knew." The warehouse creaked around them, the sound amplifying the tension. Helena was recording everything on her phone, having gotten Patricia's consent before the meeting started. "What happened after that meeting?" she asked. Patricia took a long drag from her cigarette. "Crawford was paranoid. He had me arrange surveillance on Jennifer, on Marcus." She nodded toward him. "On anyone who might be connected to the investigation. When Jennifer wouldn't back down, even after Crawford tried to buy her silence, he made a call. Not from his office phone, from a burner phone he kept in a safe. I heard him say, 'Make it look like the journalist did it. He's already been sniffing around.'" Marcus felt rage building in his chest, 15 years of suppressed fury, threatening to break free. "You heard him order the murder, and you said nothing?" Patricia's composure cracked. "I was terrified. You don't understand what these people are capable of. A week after Jennifer died, another employee who asked too many questions had an accident, fell down the stairs in his apartment building, broke his neck. The police ruled it accidental, but we all knew. I stayed quiet, kept my head down, and got out as soon as I could manage it without raising suspicions." Helena pulled out a folder of documents. "We need more than your testimony. Do you have any physical evidence? Documents, recordings, anything that could corroborate what you're telling us?" Patricia hesitated, then reached into her coat and pulled out a flash drive. "I kept insurance. Copies of emails, financial records, recordings of meetings I wasn't supposed to record. I thought if I ever needed protection, this would be my bargaining chip. But after Dmitry Volkov died in that car accident, I realized no amount of evidence would keep me safe if I used it. Marcus took the flash drive, feeling its weight despite its tiny size. Why now? Why are you willing to talk now? Patricia's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Because I saw in the news that you were released. 15 years you spent in prison for something Crawford did. And Jennifer's daughter, Emma, she's the same age now as Jennifer was when she died. I see her sometimes, around the city. She looks just like her mother. How do I live with that? How do I keep silent knowing what I know? The sound of car engines outside made them all freeze. Through the broken windows, they could see 2 black SUVs pulling up to the warehouse. Patricia went pale. They followed me. Oh God, they followed me. Helena grabbed Patricia's arm. There's an exit in the back. We need to leave now. But Marcus was already moving, positioning himself between the women and the main entrance. The journalist in him wanted to stay, to confront whoever was coming, but the survivor he'd become in prison knew better. They ran through the warehouse, their footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. Behind them, they could hear car doors slamming, voices shouting. The back exit led to an alley where Helena had parked her car as a precaution. They piled in, Helena starting the engine before the doors were even closed. As they sped away, Marcus looked back to see men in dark suits emerging from the alley, one of them speaking into a phone. "They'll have gotten your license plate," he told Helena. "We need to get Patricia somewhere safe and then go to the authorities immediately." "The FBI," Patricia said from the back seat. "Not the local police. Crawford has too many connections there. The FBI has been investigating corruption in city construction contracts. An agent named Sarah Coleman approached me a year ago, but I was too scared to cooperate then." Helena navigated through traffic, her hands steady despite the adrenaline Marcus could see in her eyes. "I know Coleman. She's solid. I'll call her as soon as we're somewhere secure." They drove to a hotel near JFK Airport, the kind of place where anonymity was expected and questions weren't asked. In the room, Helena made the call while Marcus reviewed the contents of the flash drive on Patricia's laptop. What he found exceeded even Patricia's description. Detailed records of bribes, evidence of bid rigging spanning dozens of projects, and most damning, a recording of Crawford discussing Jennifer Morrison's murder with someone he referred to only as the cleaner. "Coleman's on her way with a team," Helena announced. "She's been building a case against Crawford for 2 years, but hasn't had the evidence to move forward. This changes everything." Patricia sat on the bed, looking smaller than she had in the warehouse. "What happens to me now?" "Witness protection, most likely," Helena said gently. "You'll have to testify, but they'll keep you safe." Marcus stood by the window, watching planes take off into the darkening sky, each one carrying people to new destinations, new lives. He thought about Jennifer Morrison, who would never get that chance, and about her daughter Emma, who had grown up without a mother because powerful men had decided her life was an acceptable loss. "It's not enough," he said quietly. "Even if Crawford goes down, even if I'm exonerated, it doesn't bring Jennifer back. It doesn't give me back 15 years. It doesn't undo any of it." Helena moved to stand beside him. "No, it doesn't. But it prevents Crawford from doing this to anyone else. It shows that the truth matters, even when it takes 15 years to surface, and it gives you the rest of your life to live as a free man, truly free, not just out of prison, but free from the weight of injustice." The FBI arrived an hour later, Agent Coleman proving to be a sharp-eyed woman who listened to Patricia's story with professional intensity while her team secured the evidence. She promised Patricia immediate protection and assured Marcus that the exoneration process would be expedited given the new evidence. As dawn broke over New York City, Marcus stood on the hotel's roof parking lot, Helena beside him. The city spread out before them, awakening to another day of 8 million stories. His own story had taken a dark turn 15 years ago, but it wasn't over. Crawford would be arrested within hours, the investigation would expand, and the truth would finally have its day. "What will you do now?" Helena asked. "Once you're officially exonerated." Marcus thought about it, about the life he'd lost, and the one he might build. "Write," he said simply. "Tell stories that matter. Jennifer died trying to expose the truth. The least I can do is continue that work." Helena smiled, exhaustion and triumph mingling on her face. "I know a few publications that would be very interested in an investigative journalist with your experience and motivation." As they watched the sun rise over the city, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years. Hope. Not the naive hope of his younger self, but a harder, more resilient version, forged in the crucible of injustice and tempered by survival. The fight for truth had cost him everything, but it had also revealed what couldn't be taken, his integrity, his purpose, and now, finally, his freedom. The story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Marcus Sullivan had been silenced for 15 years, but now he had a voice again, and he intended to use it. For Jennifer Morrison, for her daughter Emma, for everyone who had been crushed by the weight of corruption and indifference. The truth had been buried, but like all buried things, it had found its way to the surface, and Marcus would make sure it could never be buried again.